Hello. Mento, are you okay to make me a host again, please?
Yes, I'll do that now.
Marvelous. I'll just make you a co-host as well. Right. Everyone always uses the microphone, or no one uses it. Green is good. If it goes red, I need to change the battery.
You just hold that. Hi. It's fine. Years teacher, so I'm used to getting attention in a very different way. So welcome everybody tonight to Bookmarks Bookshop. I'm not sure if any of you have been here before or this is your first visit. We're an independent small bookshop, as you can see, with a socialist audience. And we love our bookshop and we love these events. My name's Paula Champion. I am part of a team here at Bookmarks. One of my main roles is to organise the events, which happen regularly throughout the year. I'll just introduce you to some of the other team. We've got Ursula behind here. She is the manager of the bookshop, and she does loads of different things. Thank you, appreciation there. We have Tom over here, who does a lot of our ordering of books, as well as, again, a lot of everything else. And we have Nathan, who's come tonight to help us with the tech, because normally we don't have our events online, so this is a first, and we're hoping it goes smoothly. So yes, welcome to you all, and welcome to people online who I can't see, but I think you can, Nathan? Are there? Okay, great. Welcome to tonight's event, which we're very happy to be doing in partnership with Professor Parvati from it's Queen Mary's University of London. First such event like this, so fantastic and good to see you all. I expect many of you have come from there. We have a number of different events with authors throughout the year. And our next one will be in March, which I'll tell you a little bit more about after. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. The toilets are actually downstairs, so if you need to go, if you can come as discreetly as possible through here. There's some steps, be careful, they're quite steep, and at the bottom you turn left and the toilets are there. If we have to evacuate in an emergency, we've got the front door, but actually our fire exit is again down the stairs, but this time to the right, and that will take us to the back of the building out onto the street. So how it's going to work this evening is we've got a number of speakers, both here and then we have a speaker online. So I'm going to introduce each speaker. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Okay? Yep. So our first speaker tonight, hang on, is Professor Navaratnam, who is on the advisory board, an advisory board member of Queen Mary's University of London Global Policy Institute. And he's going to talk for about 5 minutes. So over to you. You've got your own mic there. Yep.
Thank you very much. Again, I'll join in saying welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce the author, primary author, Parvati Nair. I think in this room, everybody knows Parvati. Very little needs to be said about her. I had the fortune of knowing Parvati for half a decade, or probably more, when I started working with the predecessor of the current Vice President for International at Queen Mary, who happened to be a graduate of the same university as I. We won't go back the ages, should we? Long, long ago. And he he did political science and I did medicine, kind of difference. But we still met and we got to know each other. And this is Colin Grant. And Colin started at Bath University as VP International. And Colin and I met very briefly in an alumni reception in Singapore when I was the WHO representative for the World Health Organization with the Western Pacific Regional Office. Oh God, these big long names. And got to know that. And then when Colin moved to Southampton, and then from Southampton to Queen Mary, I started the Global Policy Institute when I had the fortune of meeting up with Parvati. Parvati is a unique person, really unique. And those of us who are blessed to be able to know her should thank the opportunity of knowing her. She's unique in many ways. Parvati is not only professor of Hispanic cultural and migration studies. And people like me who work, the only thing we know about migration is when I was a young doctor back in Asia, and I had to deal with the Vietnam illegal migrants, the boat people. That tells you my age, okay? So, in that era, we did not have policies, we did not know what we were doing, and we were saying, put them all on an island. That was the answer. That was not the answer that was needed. But that's what we did, and let's be honest about it, that's what we did. But the uniqueness of our Parvati is that she's worked, and I think, Parvati, you have to correct me if my notes are correct. You were seconded to the UN, was it 2012, 2010, 2012? 2012, when she was asked to be the founding director of the United Nations Universities Institute on Globalized and Culture Mobility in Barcelona, Spain. And the work she did and developed the guidelines, etc., which was finally adopted when she became the chair of the working group, if I remember right, on migration, on the global migration group of the UN. And the draft global compact for safe migration that was adopted by nearly all the countries of the UN. But these led to a better understanding of what migration is. And I think her contribution in both these areas is something that we should be. I want to use the UN language, but people don't like the UN language because it seems so artificial. But really, we should be grateful for her for leading the group and developing these guidelines. And later, she became the syndicated member of the Modeling International Mobility Group. Mobility Convention. It became a convention. And that whole area has evolved. We now, in this current era, live with migration, but two types of migration, legal migration and illegal migration. My candid criticism of the current government is that they really don't know what they're doing of migration. And I wish they made Parvati a minister of migration. For a simple reason, when you evolve policies, the policies, I always say this when I was with the World Health Organization, it's great sitting down in working groups, writing policy declarations. And then you go and apply it. Firstly, you don't talk to your client. And the client is the person who's finally you're impacting on. Number two, the person who's going to implement that. If you don't talk to them, they don't know. Parvati is unique in that sense that she translates everything into every step. Both the client, she understands the client, and also she understands the implementer of your policy. And that's the uniqueness in Parvati. And I think, I won't talk too much, Parvati. Your book tells a lot. I wish you'd write a book on illegal migration in this country. Maybe I'll persuade you sometime. But I can go on for the next half an hour, but I've been given only 5 minutes, and I think I've exceeded my 5 minutes. But just to say, Parvati, thank you for all your contributions, and I look forward to the book on the local migration from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Parvati's book will be on sale here tonight, or it's out for you to look at when we finish. So our next speaker is Professor Liz Wells, and she is the series editor of the Routledge series called Photography, Place and Environment. So come on down, Liz.
Thanks very much. Thank you. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you so much to Bookmarks for hosting it and for being prepared to experiment in taking it online as well. I hope we're succeeding. And I want to say something about the series. And the first thing to say is particular thanks all the authors, which no series can exist. I just sit there and they do the hard work. I don't know how to say next slide. I suppose I should say next slide, please. So why was I interested? I write about land and environment in relation to photography and moving image. I have a background in visual cultural studies, a formative background in sociology, and also in theatre. So I'm interested in storytelling, in drama, in how you make people think. And photography, place, environment, which then leads to questions of politics, social and environmental issues. Photography as a means of investigation, photography as a means of communication, all seem to sort of wrap up quite nicely. And as a little aside, I also love the fact that PPE relates to philosophy, politics and economics, as many of you will know. So that's my little sort of, that's the acronym is very nice. Slide, please. I'll just give you a bit of background about the series. In 2014, I was approached by a commissioning editor at Bloomsbury Academic to propose a theme and to act as series editor. They were then expanding their photo list, and they had acquired titles from a Sage and from IB Taurus, including one of my monographs, Landbatter's Landscape Photography, Culture and Identity, and various other publications that I'd done with Taurus. So I was now dealing with art and photography editors at Bloomsbury, and they asked me to sort of move on and make some new proposals. So, slide please. In December 18, we published our first book, Coal Cultures. It came out in hardback only. The model is what I happen to think is an out-of-date model, which is a model of library sales first. So all the series titles come out in hardback, and 18 months later, they come out in paperback. I worked at a university where they wait for the paperbacks because they can't spend all their budget on hardback. So I personally think publishers haven't got that one right at the moment. The second title was Landscapes Between Then and Now. Which is on photography, memory and reconciliation in post-apartheid Southern Africa. And Nicola Brandt, artist and academic, is from Namibia. I met her actually because I external examined her doctorate at Ruskin, Oxford, and later approached her as a contributor. And as a series editor, I find that chance plays quite a large part, probably particularly in the early stages of establishing a series, because I'm far more likely now to be approached by somebody because they know someone who's, or who's worked with a series, or they've come across one of the other titles. Slide, please. In 2019, Routledge acquired photo research titles from Bloomsbury. However, the scheduled transfer in early 2020 was interrupted by, guess what? All the books were stuck in the Bloomsbury warehouse, locked. Nobody could access them. Routledge couldn't access them. No sales were possible, even online. And the series launch, which was an in-person event at Birkbeck, London, planned for March the 26th, 2020, was one of the first lockdown victims. So I just tell you that because it's been a bit of a bumpy ride, not my fault, and several authors sort of also got, including Parvati actually, got caught up in other things that happened as a consequence of lockdown, like trying to run a school at a major university and write a book at the same time. Slide, please. It also meant that, and what I'm doing is sort of running you information in front of your eyes and on your screens if you're online, and then speaking over it. Lockdown also meant that conferences that often lead to that interesting chat in the bar that leads to sort of say, well, actually, I really, tell me more about your research. Might you be interested in making a proposal? Of course, also didn't, it's slowed things down. But to their credit, Routledge got on with publishing, even though everyone was working from home. And I did wonder whether publishing is perhaps more able to deal with the consequences of limited mobility. Sort of even if you could move around in the UK, you couldn't necessarily go to conferences internationally and so on. Because we're slightly more flexible in how we can work as researchers, authors, and so on. So anyhow, eventually we got through lockdown. With Routledge, the titles come out in hardback and also in ebook, and then later, as I said, paperback. It's sort of quite helpful to know this is systematic. For instance, we know that sometime in 2026, those of you who perhaps don't choose to buy the hardback, although you might persuade your university libraries to do so, know that you'll be able to get hold of a paperback copy in a year's time, or just over a year's time. Slide, please. So to date, we have 6 titles, and they fall very roughly into 3 arenas of response to the PPE themes. So that photography, we have a title on survey methods. We have a title coming up that's on rephotography. Place, colonization, Migrant Sea, and then environment, coal cultures, coal as an extraction industry, environmental activism, ecology in the era of the Anthropocene. At the moment, 2 more proposals are in peer review. That's to say they've been submitted to Routledge and they're out for peer review. And I'm in discussions about 3 further possibilities. And just in terms of process, often people approach me and I help potential authors develop ideas and format their proposal, which once submitted to Routledge then goes out via the normal academic process of peer review. Alternatively, Routledge might receive a proposal that they think might fit the series, and they send it on to me. In terms of authors and background, Coal Cultures, Derek Price, he's based in Bristol now, UK, Welsh. Nicola is based in Germany at the moment, but she's from Namibia, did her doctorate here, is now living in Hamburg, I think. There are 2 proposals going through peer review from academics in Paris and in the Netherlands, and I'm in discussion with the further possibilities under development relating to Portugal and the post-colonial, and likewise to Cyprus and the post-colonial. So, quite a lot going on. Why do I do it? Some people ask me. Well, I suppose as a retired academic, actually I'm not a retired academic, I'm just retired from working for a university and doing the things that universities require you to do that stop you from doing the research that you want to do. As an emeritus professor, it's fantastic to be able to spend time keeping in touch with ideas and debates. I do have one question which maybe we should think about a bit, all of us, which is the notion of the research monograph in an era of social media, blogs and artificial intelligence. I wonder to what extent people still want or even can engage with the long read that a research monograph implies. On the other hand, a book I finished in 2006, which is, a research monograph, it's still in print. And the other day I received a request for help accessing it from an academic in Iran. So maybe longevity is a key characteristic. This is something I wrote in the early 2000s. And somebody is now trying to get hold. Unfortunately, it can't be sent to her by Routledge because Iran is on the red list. So I haven't quite figured out how to get it to her, but I will. Slide, please. So the forthcoming title is from Gary MacLeod. He's based in Tokyo. And again, it draws on his doctorate completed a few years ago now, but it was his external examiner who suggested that he approach me. So I mention this because, again, it seems that the series is dependent on the word getting around. So please do so, spread the word. There are some leaflets with all the series titles on, sitting somewhere on display there. Slide, please. But we're not here to talk about the series. We're here to talk about the latest publication in the series. And it's so good to see so many people interested in Parvati's work. Thank you for coming.
Great, thank you very much. So, without further ado then, Parvati, if you can come, and you've had a lot of introduction, I'm not going to go over it again, but to say I'm really glad that you're here, and I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sit down maybe because I have to read a little bit. I thought that firstly I just wanted to say thank you for being here on a wet, cold day. It's lovely to see all the faces that I know from different sides of my life, all coming together, and also many faces that I don't know, and that's very heartening. So thank you very much. I really want to thank, first of all, a few people who might have been here today but were not able to make it. Our chair, Professor Yasmin Ibrahim at Borderlines at Queen Mary, was the first one who put the idea of a possible book launch in my head, because it hadn't occurred to me that I could do so. And she was very keen at Borderlines. And I want to thank Fatima, who is online. And I just want to say that we are all of us here in Bookmarks, this wonderful bookstore that my family and I have been coming to for many, many years now. And we're very honored to be here. Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Nathan, for making it all work, because there are a large number of people who are online. And so we are not alone. We're not just those of us here. There are a lot more people online as well. And thank you so much for being here. I want to thank my school, the School of the Arts, especially the section of Languages, Linguistics and Film at Queen Mary University of London. They've always been there for me, and it's been a long and wonderful experience of working with many, many interesting colleagues whom I've learned so much from. But I also really want to thank Professor Navaratnam and colleagues who were with us at the Global Policy Institute, but particularly Professor Nava. You have always guided us and given us vision and encouragement, and always been there at the end of an email, a question. Thank you so much for that. Every module, every course that I've ever taught on photography has had books, has had Professor Liz Wells' books on it. So thank you, Liz. When I sent you the proposal, I had no assumption that you would accept it. I'm very honored, but also daunted. So thank you. And many, many wonderful books have gone before and again, they're also on the reading list of my students at the moment, doing a module on photography, activism, and environmental justice. Your book is there, Birgit, so, and some of the other books there as well. So hopefully, we are all learning from each other, but I have learned a lot from the books in the series. And of course, I thank all my colleagues, my friends, my interlocutors, my long-suffering and wonderful family as well. And I want to particularly say thanks to Sana Mustafa, who is online and will speak to us soon. Professor Shahram Khosravi, who was due to speak, is unfortunately unwell, but I really want to thank my colleague on Crossings, the journal we edit together, Dr. Federica Mazzara, who will read his presentation for us. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say there are two of my PhD students here, and I'm very, very proud of them. But just so you know, I'm also nervous because my most amazing, wonderful PhD supervisor is online. So thank you, Jo, and for being there. She's in New York, and it's wonderful that she has given her time to this. So I am very, very lucky to have you all here. So I would like to just put this book a little bit in context and then maybe share some of the images. I'm going to sit down as I have to turn pages. But basically, this book, if you like, what I've tried to do is an inquiry into via photography, into displacement as a historical and political process affecting individuals, communities, and environments alike. I focused on the Mediterranean region as a microcosm of global dynamics, and also as a space that has historically been crossed and recrossed over centuries for reasons of commerce, conquest, and conflict. I know there are some Mediterranean people in the room, very lucky ones, and you know more about this than I do, but I think we all have in some way been connected to the Mediterranean over centuries. There are patterns and tropes here that confirm the centrality of mobility. The region itself, indeed the Mediterranean Sea, is the result of ancient geophysical mobilities and the fluid passage of oceanic waters across the Atlantic, indeed from the Atlantic that had exceeded their own supposed limits. And belying the imposition of policies and borders that map the Mediterranean Sea and its shores in terms of differentiations in power between global north and south is a fundamental connectivity, a mosaic-like sort of reliance on diversity and difference as modes of being, and multiple granularities that are interlinked of geologies and cultures that emerge and shift in this amazing confluence of three continents. And tracing displacement as it unfolds in the region today is a copious and ongoing outflow of photographs, and indeed this has been so for several decades now, by both professionals and amateurs, recording the details of such lived and too often deadly experiences as everyday processes that mark our contemporary world and play out as a struggle for survival. Most of the writing for this book, as Professor Wells said, the book was an idea that started a long time ago and got sort of attention in drabs, and I was lined by article afforded to me by my university, Queen Mary, University of London, in 2022-23, though the research for it took place, as I said, many years before that. At the time, it seemed to me that the issues affecting displacement had been steadily escalating in intensity, complexity, and reach for many decades, as borders to the world's centers of power hardened and became increasingly securitized. 9/11, the war on terror, and the establishment of the prison camp of Guantanamo had long confirmed the ways in which globally states of exception were ceasing to be outside of the norm and instead were extended historical political processes that rapidly overrode human rights. Environmental emergencies were, of course, already well advanced and visibly accelerating, exacerbated by governmental policies that sidelined environmental priorities. Instead, the ensuing displacement, and by this I kind of mean both the irrevocable environmental damage or the undoing of places and human dispersal at the same time, had become a mass phenomenon, inevitably tackled by increasingly hostile policies and practices. When I began working on this book, it seemed to me, therefore, that many of the key issues around displacement had been around for a very long time. But what was rapidly changing was the scale and intensity that they presented. And as Professor Nava said, I think governments began to figure out more and more ways of actually tackling, as they would call it, immigration. Nothing prepared me, though, for the ways in which these same issues have mounted exponentially since I finished the first full draft of this book in late 2023, reaching extents that confirm displacement to be a symptom of ideologies and practices of violation, not solely of human rights, but also of planetary ones. If the war in Syria triggered an unprecedented focus on displacement in the Eastern Mediterranean, then the war on Gaza and also the conflict underway in Sudan have turned displacement into a mass manifold experience, affecting entire communities and environments not just once, but over and again, with no end or recovery in sight. Although drafted before the most recent conflicts in the region, I've wanted in this book to explore how contemporary photography engages with the question of such displacement as process. Has photography, I often wonder, lost its worth? And are images memorable at all in times of overwhelming forgetting? As we all know, smartphones and digital platforms have transformed photography into the vernacular and the commonplace. At the same time, photographs offer us traces of times and places, and in so doing, they often propose the inextricability of people and places, environments and communities. The Mediterranean is a region under threat, not solely that of rising mass displacements of people, but at a deeper level, that of increasing vulnerability to the Anthropocene as social and environmental emergencies abound. The dynamics of human displacement proliferating in the region appear framed within an as yet largely unvoiced context of encroaching environmental emergency, both of which are provoked by ideologies and long histories of extraction, colonial appropriation, profiteering, and warfare. This book, therefore, focuses on the idea of displacement as glimpsed through photography. And it seems a privilege to do so from a place of relative security. It is founded on the notion that displacement is a multifaceted process involving the gradual or sudden breakup of entire biological, environmental, social, and cultural habitats. My guiding question has been whether photography can really serve to engage a rethinking of these global and regional dynamics to open a space for dignity that is both human and environmental. In order to link images to lived experiences, I've tried to weave in accounts from fieldwork through this book, so as to relay the enormous insights that people who are either displaced or else engage closely with issues that relate to displacement have shared. In a sense, I hope they illuminate the key notions that follow from the images included here. Could I have the next slide, please? The one after that. Thanks. This is an image that came out a long time ago in 2002, and it's one that really has shaped my vision of what I wanted to write on. And it is by the Spanish photographer Javier Bauluz, and it's taken in Tarifa, which is the southernmost point of the Spanish peninsula. The image was, and I think it still remains, absolutely striking. It requires nothing in terms of caption, or context even really, to awaken the imagination and make the viewer think beyond the frame to the starkly portrayed issues here. When Baulutha's image hit the headlines in 2002, it created shockwaves that have clearly, though, not really lasted long enough. The image is one of a series that he took in Tarifa. He talks about how he was walking down the beach with his camera and suddenly came upon this weird scene where people were sitting, having a day out on the beach, and a body was lying face down on the beach. And the series shows the arrival of the civil guards, the removal of the body, while people continue having their day out on the beach. This graphic display of the Mediterranean as a border zone immediately triggers many, many contrasts in our minds. Obviously, life and death, but also the global north and the global south, where they meet and hit against one another. Citizens and non-citizens, and Professor Nava talked about illegal people who are illegal. Of course, many of us will now say that no one is illegal, and but there are those who have legal documents and those who don't, those who are citizens and those who are not, those with rights and those without rights. But most of all, it's not only about what's in the frame of the image and what is around it or excluded. The larger context of Spain as a border zone of Europe that is physically very close to North Africa, but also really it is about vision and blindness. Who can see and who sees what and how we see. And in a way, it's also about photography itself. It's about the power of the image to frame what otherwise might get ignored or even never noticed, never named. But yet, the contradiction, of course, is that this image goes back to 2002. The numbers of deaths in the Mediterranean are just mounting. This has become a commonplace feature of the news, and yet there is, the measures that actually create risk and increase risk and exacerbate risk are only increasing. Many such images of death at sea are shocking, even if only in passing, and call forth the vulnerability of life itself. But accompanying them is the more enduring and increasingly hostile political rhetoric on migration that imposes inhospitality and that normalizes displacement. In working on migration and with refugees over and again, across geopolitical contexts and over several decades, one encounters trends that are set to increase in the years ahead. A dire scenario where 1% hold more wealth than the bottom 95%, and the rise of global precarity combined with global oligarchies that hold economic and political power. Many displaced persons have been affected by the processes of our modernity, most especially the global military-industrial complex, generating billions of dollars annually, whereby global strategic influences cause dire local consequences. Today, it's sad to say that 1 out of 6 children, that's nearly 500 million children, live in conflict zones, and 120 armed conflicts are underway, with 1 person in 8 affected. We're witnessing the increased militarization of borders and the widespread criminalization of human mobility, even as the environmental costs of conflict are meanwhile also proliferating, simultaneously affecting ecosystems, wildlife, and human health, polluting waters and air, and rapidly accelerating climate disasters. It seems that we humans make sure that the Anthropocene advances thanks to the many triggers of our industrialized modern existence. The displaced are growing exponentially in numbers, and at the heart of contemporary democracies, we see the spread of elected nationalisms and populism, so that walls, borders, razor wire, and weapons are raised to detain, deter, or destroy the displaced. We may ask why one might expect photographs to make any difference then. If I've tried to explore the extent to which photographs might address and perhaps even work to counter political historical processes, then this is because of the ways in which photography draws upon not only cognition or how we come to know of things, but also affect. It affects us viscerally through the overlapping forces of the aesthetic, the ethical, the emotional, the imaginative, and the documentary that collude and collide within the frame of the image and often exceed the frame. I do not see still photographs as static. Instead, I'm interested in how photographs work to reorder and reposition how and what we see or consider. Many writers on photography have noted the medium's ability to offer glimpses into other perspectives and experiences, and so engage imagination and open a window, not to another world as such, but to the traces of being and difference. This is what I've tried to say through my use of the term photopolitics in this book. I'm gesturing not to the carved rhetoric of establishments of power, but to the more subtle movements of vision through which we come to sense understanding across different geographical, cultural, political, and historical frames. My photographic journey took me first to the inextricability of the social from the environmental. It became so evident through Roger Grace's amazing underwater photography that was generously shared by Greenpeace. Would you mind? Yeah. An organization that he worked for as a photographer of oceans for many years. And this is his image of bluefin tuna taken off the coast of Italy, I believe, of Sardinia. This image is haunting only when put in context, because of course it's also very beautiful in a way. His images of the fish and underwater images are very striking. The global tuna market, and I'm sure there are many tuna eaters here, but the global tuna market is so large that trade, both licensed and unlicensed, turn the tuna fish into at once the victims of excessive commerce and consumption, and also into the agents of destruction of their own habitats, as through human intervention and profiteering, they proliferate in cages underwater, consume smaller fishes, destroy their underwater habitats, become excessively fat, and so contribute to their own demise and that of their environments. It's a very strange dynamic. Within this context, where time and place are so clearly finite, one realizes that displacement is the scramble to survive. Sorry, I think I have skipped a page. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine. Could I move to the next image, please? Thanks. This is an image by Samuel Aranda, Catalan photographer, who has done many projects in and around refugees, migration, and also around the Mediterranean region and the Middle East. This photograph was taken in Melilla, a small Spanish colonial town that persists on Moroccan soil as a vestige, if you like, a trace of the remnants of Spanish colonial control of northern Morocco, and as a border city between Africa and the European Union that is in the African continent. The history of colonial occupation persists in the day passes afforded to Moroccan laborers who live outside in Morocco, but can come into the city to service the city. So they are the cleaners and the sweepers and the ones who do the menial jobs in this city, in this very militarized city, I should say. The same frontier passes enable these Moroccans to also turn by night or by evening into porters who smuggle tax-free goods from Melilla to Morocco. Their lives are determined by this border that relegates them to inequality and historical disjuncture. Aranda's image disrupts neat divisions of global north and south, presenting them instead as mutually and unevenly implicated, so that the lines between legality and illegality become questionable too. The image suggests that to be displaced historically and politically is also to eke out a life on the cracks of the border in relation to the powers that oppose and oppress. As such, the notion of crisis shifts from event to process and even to policy, a dynamic of displacement that places ever more numbers and forms of life into borderline precarity and the struggle for survival, but one that maintains the historically entrenched status quo of hegemonies and inequalities. Can I have the next slide, please? Many of you will know this wonderful image by Zainab Sedira called The Lovers. She's an artist known for her work on migration, French, Algerian, and living, I believe, in Brixton. She frames, and this image frames her interest in the sea as a space of crossings and fluxes of both goods and people. Photography, however, both Sedira's and that of others more widely, is not just representative. It is also, I think, an emergent medium, evocative of memories collected from experience and from narratives, always in engagement with one's memory and with one's imagination. Sedira's image, viewed within the larger corpus of her work, suggests that the sea is at once a space of hope and despair, of passage and risk. In this existential ambivalence, the sea is also a liminal space where, for many, life slips rapidly into death. Indeed, the Mediterranean Sea is a covert battle zone, one where the power of European border practices clashes with the underground workings of those who struggle to cross without papers. With no correct data to hand of the numbers of deaths at sea, it is fair to say that the human and the environmental finally meld in the depths of the sea, as it has turned into a veritable cemetery for the unknown numbers of people who have lost their lives there and who continue to lose their lives there. Could I have next slide, please? This image is by the Magnum photographer Mark Power, and it was taken in the Zaatari refugee camp, which is one of the largest refugee camps in Jordan. And I think that in context of great risk of displacement without access to papers, where habitats and lives are under threat, the question of home and where one may belong begs to be asked. This image is that of a little girl in her best dress, standing in the desert next to the ramshackle hut that is her home for now. And I think it's fair to say that it would touch many chords. A closer look speaks of her history, and that presumably of her family, of conflict, destruction, loss, uncertainty, and the at best responsive but not preemptive work of multilateral organizations such as UNHCR. That only, sorry, I'm just fiddling with my, that only prolong, if you like, her access to a place that she can call home. Zaatari confirms domicide as a core facet of displacement that is both environmental and social. It also epitomizes the struggle for survival as more displaced and as more and more displaced persons have arrived over the decades and turned the camp into a camp city, an urban hub. Could I have the next picture, please? Thank you. Some of us who are here online will know this photographer and visual artist, John Halaka, an American of Palestinian origin based in California, who is both an academic and a visual artist. A key sort of trope in his work, in his images, has been that of unhomeliness. And this is perhaps a concept or a practice, a process that has long been entrenched in the Mediterranean region. John Halaka's triptych in sepia of a late Palestinian refugee in Lebanon who lived through the first Nakba and then spent his life in Nahr al-Bared camp in Lebanon evokes loss, memory, and the ways in which memory, place, and time define life through a collage of the human and the natural. And the twigs, in a way, speak both of time, the passage of time, of abandonment, and the ways in which his hands, his face are split, if you like, his body is split by the memory of where he came from, a landscape and a vegetation that is very, very different, of course, from the camp where he lives and has spent most of his life until he passed away, I believe, in 2019. The next image, please. This image is by a young refugee by the name of Alpha, and I was very fortunate that he responded to me, This is someone who is a contributor and was running a Instagram page called The Humans of Moria. And many of us will be aware or have heard of or maybe even visited the Moria camp, the notorious Moria camp in Greece, which was burnt down. Alpha was a former resident. He'd been lived in many countries as a refugee in Africa and had finally made it to Greece. And he had been a resident of Moria. And he was running this page called Humans of Moria, which was very much modeled along the Humans of New York blog. And it gestures eloquently to the frailty of home that must be made and remade by the displaced as they navigate the uncertain borders of all kinds. This image is called Kitchen in Moria. And it is, of course, a place where people were cooking food, lighting fires and cooking food for want of a better kitchen. The burning of Moria, it was burnt down, this camp was built originally for 3,000 people, but ended up at one point having as many as 20,000 until it was burnt down in 2020, led to temporary shelter in Karatepe camp by the sea, which is of course prey to wind, salt and sand. The inhospitality of migration policy in Europe translates into these small everyday realities that speak loudly of the precarities of home and belonging, so that at times entire generations of people, of families and communities are refugees, or worse, they're awaiting papers and live in uncertain political limbo for extended periods. Could I have the next image, please? Yeah, thank you. This image is by the late Moroccan photographer Leila Alaoui. Leila Alaoui was, she passed away very young, at the age of, I think in her 33. She was unfortunately in a shootout in Ouagadougou while doing a project with UN Women. But in her brief career as a photographer, she covered some really eloquent, she covered very eloquently, I should say, many issues affecting particularly North Africa and the southern shores of the Mediterranean. And what she really looks at is youth and young people and the question of the future. And this question of the future is, of course, one that hangs over the issue of displacement, not only the displacement of people, but also the displacement of the earth, the undoing of the earth. And with it comes the question, if you like, of hope. I would argue that the photography of displacement, hard though it may be to contemplate, and it's often not at all uplifting to look at many of these images and actually imagine what those realities might be and wonder how close or far they are from where we are. Nevertheless, they touch inevitably on questions of hope because they work with the mission of renewing vision. If the photograph relates to a then and a there, a moment in the past that is also an elsewhere in time, if not also in place, then its purpose is not merely as a document or trace of time, but as a thread that orients us towards the future. For without this power to orient, photography would, I think, serve little purpose and would cease to matter in our lives. This is all the more so if we consider the ubiquity of images. Sorry, not being very good at turning pages, and the sheer transience of most of them. Photography works not merely as a trace of time, but as an inroad to time, as a temporal harness. It works in tandem with memory and with hope, and in opposition to the social and terrestrial colonial obliteration forced by the Anthropocene. Could I have the next image, please? And this is Leila Alaoui's image, youth standing on a rock. I think it was the first portrait cover image of your books. Liz, am I right? Yeah. And in a world that is environmentally and socially colonized by entrenched systems of ownership, control, and profit, if photography acts as a tool and a medium in the struggle for hope, then it can only do so by opening a space for the decolonization of vision itself. In this context, I think that Leila Alawi in her brief life did much towards this effort. Her images of youth, and especially of the uprisings in North Africa in 2011, confirm both the tenuous ground for hope in the Mediterranean region, and that ground is really kept alive, I think, particularly in the southern shores of the Mediterranean through a rising youth population. And far beyond the Mediterranean in many ways, and also the absolute necessity of image making, imagination and reimagination in the hopeful struggle for dignity, both environmental and social, that we need in a bid to attenuate displacement. Thank you for bearing with me.
Well, I think bearing with you, I think that really undersells what you've just talked about and how important it is, especially at this particular moment in time here in the UK in particular. But I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm going to move on as time is moving on, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Federica Mazzara, if you'd like to come up, from the University of Westminster. And you're going to read out some reflections from Professor Shahram Khosravi, who is part of the who is Professor of Anthropology at Stockholm University.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, this works. Hi, thank you. Thanks, Parvati. Just want to say how proud I am of your book and your work. We've known each other for quite a long time, and I know that we share views on this phenomenon. And yes, I'm pleased to talk on behalf of Shahram Khosravi, a dear friend. He's Professor of Anthropology at Stockholm University, and he has published 8 books and many articles on Iran, borders, and migration. And the most recent books are Seen Like a Smuggler, 2022, and an art book called The Gaze of the X-Ray, an Archive of Violence, 2024. And some years ago, he started Critical Border Studies, which is a network for scholars, artists, and activists to interact. And I really recommend you to have a look and contribute. So yes, I'll read this very short, but very, I'm sure it will raise lots of questions and hopefully contribute and lead to the discussion of this wonderful book. So thank you, Parvati, for the invitation. Your book is rich in many ways, theoretically and empirically. Reading it while witnessing a genocide unfold before my eyes, linking one disaster in Palestine to another in the Mediterranean Sea, I found myself grappling with a single question: how do we respond to disasters? Every moment pregnant with a disaster, an history is being thrown from one disaster into the next. What language do we need to respond to the disasters? The images of fear, pain, and despair demand our response, compelling us to take responsibility. But to respond, we must first see. And do we truly see disasters? Maurice Blanchot argued that disaster resists representation. We can never fully comprehend it, nor can we depict it in its entirety, because we can never witness the full scale of what has happened. In the writing of the disaster, Blanchot ties disaster to the act of writing, a framework that can also be applied to photography. Can we say that disasters defy visual representation because they exceed the structures of meaning on which photography relies? The disaster you write about, from Palestine to migrant shipwrecks, are not past events, they are ongoing. They rupture time and life, affecting us and transforming us. Every day, every night. This is why they evade articulation, why they refuse representation. This refusal stems from the absence of the disaster itself. While photographs offer a constant presence, boats packed with dehumanized, racialized bodies, reduced to a mass, a crisis, a package. At the same time, they are marked by an absence, the absence of the forces that created the catastrophe in the first place. Such images fail to articulate disaster because the core horror of disaster is always missing. And what is that core horror? The border. The border turns people into land, into territory, migrants, neighbors into foreigners, color into race. This is why, as you argue, photographs can function as visual borders. Referring to cinema and the figure of the black man in film, Fanon wrote that one is imprisoned by a racialized image imposed by the white gaze. In the same way, the visual border glues the migrant to racialized images. She's fixed as the imagined other, trapped in a predetermined vision of her existence. Yet, your book offers hope. It reveals how photographs, despite their limitations, create space for repositioning perspectives, for imagining otherwise. In Farsi, the word for photograph, aks, means not only reflection, but also inversion and reversal. To invert is an act of subversion. As you write, photography's transformational power stimulates the imagination, and in doing so, it offers hope. Thank you for writing this book. Sure.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, so we're moving on to our final speaker before we open up for questions and discussion. And that speaker is actually online. Are we able to see our speaker? Sana
Yes, I'm here.
Who's a movement leader in the forced displacement sector and a feminist human rights activist. Good evening, Sana. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can. Can you?
Yeah, we can see you. Just can we have a bit more volume? Okay, Sana, over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, good afternoon, everyone, everywhere. And first and foremost, congrats, Parvati, for your book. Actually, we met, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. The first and last time we met in Italy, as we both were with the Rockefeller Institute doing a conference on migration. And so it's really nice to be here with you again to celebrate this moment and this really masterpiece that you've put into the world and into the cause. To just maybe give a bit of a background of who I am and how I relate to this conversation. Well, as of 2 months ago, I was a forcibly displaced person from Syria. But thanks God, I just returned from Syria actually a few days ago. As you all know, the recent events in Syria 2 months ago with the fall of the Assad regime. I was forcibly displaced for 11 years since 2013. And I took refuge in the United States. And the journey of forced displacement for myself and for my family really shaped my personality, shaped my career, and shaped my thinking. And so in the last 10 years, I had been really focusing on advocacy and shaping the forced displacement space, and that's through shifting power into the communities that have the lived experience of forced displacement. So my focus has been about, nothing about us without us. So how can the whole space, from the storytelling into the policy, into the program design, into the service provision, be done with refugees, for refugees, and by refugees. And as many of you could imagine, it's really apparently it's a very complicated, debated basic right for refugees is that to be in charge of our own lives and our own affairs. And it's been a fight. It's been a fight for the last 10 years to make sure that policies for refugees are drafted with refugees, that programs for refugees designed by refugees, and that there are equitable partnerships between allies, supporters, and the refugees themselves. That being said, we made a lot of progress at the same time in really shifting power back to the communities that have the lived experience of forced displacement. I think what relates to this conversation very much is the storytelling piece and communication, as we think of communication and image and storytelling. This has always been one of the biggest issues I've always talked about as a public speaker, as an advocate, and as a CEO of an organization that works on the issue of refugees at the time, was what image do we put out there about our own people, about these issues, and how do we put the image and who took the image? And the making of the image that Parvati also was talking about. I think this is all very relevant as much as we talk about the importance. And I see such a book being out there is not just important and for academic use and for those who studied such things, but also I think as an archival, as a documentation of the issues that we've been living around displacement. But maybe I want to first, take a step and focus on the making of the image. I want to take an angle that has not been maybe talked about just because of our different focuses, and talk about the importance of the making of the image and who's making the image, and the ethics behind making an image, and how do we think of that while thinking about the ownership of the people with the lived experience of forced displacement. I think, it's very as many of you in the room know, almost every crisis has an image. And if we think of the Syrian refugee crisis and forced displacement, I think one of the main images come to all of our minds is the 2 years old Alan Kurdi washed up on the Turkish shore. Like that's just instinct. Like this is the first image comes to mind. And this image, I mean, I think it's important, and it's really, really amazing how the human brain works of like associating a whole issue with one image. And you think of like the why, and you think of the timing, and you think of many things. But at the same time, I think we can think of other images that they were not ethical and did not do well for the causes that they were taken about and for and by. And one of the main issues that we've been kind of advocating and working with allies about is how do we change the image to be more dignifying of the people that have been associated with and the subject of the image. And that's an issue that if you think about it, it really ingrained in our spaces, I would say, whether it's academia or even the NGO industrial complex, it's, there is a bias towards having certain images that represent people in a certain way. So typically when we think of refugees, we organically, and it's not really organic, it's by design, we think of people who are intense and ripped clothes and looking in a certain way and wearing maybe most probably the veil and with dark skin. And these are all associations that are not really just born out of reality. These are also by design, and they've been used and utilized in this way also to really create this difference between the West and the East, and to, unfortunately, been used to like fundraising, right? And have been justified. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that I've dealt with when we deal with the image, when I was like advising organizations on how they make their image and storytelling more ethical, is the challenge of like, well, but that's what brings money. And that's what gets people attention. And I think that's actually debated because that's socially constructed, and it could be dismantled just as you constructed it. You could like work on dismantling it, but it takes a commitment and an effort. But if we think about it, at the end of the day, it is true, and as my own experience when I came to the US, many people would look at me and be like, but like you speak good English and like you dress up well, how could you be a refugee? And of course that affects the ability of people supporting you and being interested in helping you. And so that's all to say that really the impact of the image and who's making it and who's behind the camera, right? And who's publishing it and how it's being used is really, really very humane. And it touches every single person in this cause. And it's a big responsibility. And I think it's nothing new that we all know, but it really the emphasizes of like how much of a big responsibility this image is. I couldn't emphasize this enough. Recently, when I was in Syria, actually, I was in Syria, of course, because I had the chance now to return to my home country, but also because my own father has been forcibly disappeared by the Assad regime for 11 years. So I was one of those people who returned to look to my dad, for my dad, as the prisons were opened. And during my search journey for my dad, in a chaotic moment of the country, I mean, moment of liberation means also moment of chaos. There were many foreign photographers that I had, come across during my searching journey, and unfortunately, many of them actually award-winning, without mentioning names, that violated every single ethic you could think of on the ground of like while trying to catch that image that will be in your brains, the image of the issue, the image of the crisis, the image of the liberation, the image of Syria. And it really kind of on like being on the other side makes you like resentful, right? And you wonder. And I'll give like a very concrete example about the making of the image. I was in one of the hospitals looking in the freezers and looking at tortured bodies to try to identify if my father is one of them. These bodies were released from one of the detention centers of Assad. And so as you can imagine, like it's really one of the worst, most hard moments. And the bodies are just like not dignified, unfortunately, tortured, burned. So I was amongst other families of the disappeared entering a freezer to look at the bodies. And we had a couple of people with us who actually have identified that their beloved ones in those bodies. And as we walk into the freezer, the one that was ahead of all of us is an American photographer who stepped into the freezer ahead of all of us, stood in the middle of it, and I have video of it, and start taking photos of our people, like those undignified and without consent, and ahead of all the families that here to look for their beloved ones, and start taking photos. And she got her shot and left, and was honored by the White House. And that's the making of the image. As someone, when I was there, I had an argument with her about, are you serious? Like, do I want my mom to learn about my dad through your TV, like through an image of yours before us having the chance to talk to our people? And so that comes back into, again, the making of the image and the responsibility of it and the ethics of it. And so I just want to say here is that as we think about photography and the importance of it and the photos and really kind of how you write history, and you write history, not just your oral history, you register it in people's memories. You're creating the narrative, right? Through this photography, you're creating the narrative that may be right, may be false, but at the end of the day, you have a responsibility and you're playing a role in creating a narrative, a historical narrative about an event. And that responsibility, really, I would say, unfortunately, it's still not fully grasped by many, and still there's a lot of work that's needed when we talk especially about sensitive issues like displacement and like wars and liberation, about the responsibilities that people and photographers show up with. Back to maybe one like last point, back to this book, and thank you again, Parvati, for that. I think a lot of the images like capture, I was happy to see that actually capture different things in different moments. And one thing that resonated with me that you were saying about like the image of the tuna, right? And like how beautiful the image is, but once you understand the context of it, you kind of see it differently. And I think same apply on human images, that also, like, I think it's an invitation for us to think about the context of it, and for us as normal, like average, not necessarily in the media or donors or anything, any image we see that captures us, like, I think we as audience as well have the responsibility, and invite us all to have the responsibility to think of the context of it, to think of like, was it consensual, who took it, how was it taken, before we really kind of like uphold this image, celebrate the person and celebrate the image. And I'm gonna stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Sana. And I think that really sort of pulled together everything that has been talked about tonight, and left me with some questions. But we're going to open it up now to the floor. And I wonder if we take maybe 3 questions, and then I'll see if you'd like to say who you're directing them at, or if it's a general question, and then I'll see who would like to come back on it. Is Sana still going to be online to take any questions as well? Perhaps if you could leave her looking, that would be good, if that's a possibility. So if you'd like to indicate, if you'd like to speak or ask a question to any of our speakers or make a comment about, you know, some of the things that have been raised by everyone tonight. Introduce yourself if you want.
Cool, thank you. My name is Julia Peck. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has contributed this evening, and congratulations to Parvati for what sounds like an absolutely amazing book. I have a general question, so I'm keen to hear from everybody who might have something to say about this. I'm really curious about the, on the one hand, necessity and hope tied up in photographic representations of migration and the pain and difficulty that can come with that. And how important it is that we know, that we understand, that we empathize, and that we have something that kind of proves that these events are happening and they're happening to real people, and that we find that relatable. And on the other hand, we have the real challenge around how that work is made from in the most ethical and sensitive way. And one of the reasons I'm interested in this is because I help train very, very many young people in image making, and we precisely grapple with these issues. But many of my students, like me, come from positions of relative privilege. Not all of them by any means, but many do. So when we come from a position of care and concern in the world, but we also come from a position of privilege, we have some real challenges about how we maintain the hope, we maintain the necessity of the work that is done, but also we try and work as ethically as possible. So I'd be really interested to hear what people have to say about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question, but seeing as I'm next to you. Thank you so much. This was kind of touched on in the last intervention, but as you were speaking, Parvati, I was thinking about this, and you used the word as well, actually, this concept of implication. And it was raised just then about the implication of photographers who, well, I'm thinking specifically of a concept called implicated subject, which you might be familiar with, by Michael Rothberg, a memory studies scholar who speaks of implicated subjects as those who somehow benefit from or contribute to systems of oppression beyond a victim-perpetrator binary. And I was thinking about that in relation to the photographers, but also actually in relation to the viewers, and in what way are the viewers of these photographs and us implicated, and how can we move from implication to responsibility, and particularly civic responsibility. I hope that's clear. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take one more question. I'm just going to take one from online. Mirza. Can we see the person? Okay. Hi, Mirza. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, please. Thank you so much for the time. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So first, I can say congratulations to Parvati. It's really a wonderful book, and they can explain many things in the photography language. I think it can take more focus of the new generations to get more things about what is going in the world, especially injustice, humanity, and different things. So my question is about Afghanistan. As you know, from many years, there are a lot of issues and problems in Afghanistan. and we have millions and millions of immigrations around the world, and also in Afghanistan, in neighbor countries. And there are many awful stories about Afghan refugees and a lot of the things. So my question is about this: is there anything, any reason that I cannot? I didn't hear anything about Afghanistan, because these countries are on the top list of disasters, problems, and immigration issues. Thank you.
Okay, so would you like to come back on the second question? Because that was directed at you.
That was Rebecca's question about implication. Yeah. And I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but I think, was it sort of from the shift from implication to engagement? I think that's a complex question, and it's one that I think many of us grapple with. We can critique, but how do we make a difference? What do we do? And in some ways, I think I would say that we are in the belly of the beast, and the beast is bigger than us. But it's the small things that you do in the everyday that make a difference. And I think it's the first, perhaps one of the most important things, and I think this is why, for me at least, photography matters, is because it is a space where you can engage, where you can get inspiration for hope in an otherwise very dark world. And I think that space for hope is really, really important, because that is about the future. And from that space, it is about working backwards within one's own context, limitations and abilities. And I doubt that in my lifetime I will see, major shifts and major, and I would say perhaps, you often, when I was a child, I used to hear older people saying, "Oh God, the world has gone to the dogs." And I used to think, how boring. And now I feel that way quite often. And I can see my son sitting there and smiling at me and, thinking, well, this is, is it age? Is it tiredness of vision in a way? And I think photography is really important about renewing, refreshing vision, and it acts, if you like, as a space of encounter with alterity, with the otherness. And I think a lot of what we lose in the world, in terms of a very utilitarian approach to the world, a very materialistic utilitarian approach, is the question of wonderment. And in a way, I think that's why nature photography is so important. It refreshes vision, and it sort of makes us realize how small we are and how short a time we're here for, and how important it is to do things make small changes in the everyday. And I've certainly seen some small changes in my lifetime, but also I think the system that requires addressing is getting bigger by the day. So the problems are also growing, even as we see changes happening for the better. But it's not a clear-cut question. I don't know if I've answered you, Rebecca, but yeah.
Okay, I don't know, perhaps the first question, do you think, Sana, maybe you want to come back on that? It's kind of something you have opened up.
Was it about the coming kind of with the intentions and the care and the concerns, but also with privilege?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I answered it in many ways, but I would say one thing that I always, in my job and in my community, everyone who's an ally of an issue they don't have the lived experience of the, we always I ask myself about many issues that I'm like an ally, I don't have the lived experience of it, about how do I show up in the way that's respectful and dignifying of the issue and the people. And I think I always say to everyone, including myself, is to ask ourselves a number of questions. First is like to identify who am I to this issue. Am I a local community member? Am I a proximate community member? Or am I just a person who's like a human who believes in human rights and interested in this issue, to just understand exactly kind of and identify and recognize who am I to this issue. The second question is like, what do I bring? And that's always what I say, ask yourself about showing up is like, what do you bring that really the communities don't bring? And kind of like being able to sit down and really name and identify exactly what you bring to this issue and that others don't bring. And that's a really important piece of the question, because a lot of people struggle of like, is this my space or not? Should I be here or not? Whether it's being in photography or working on the issue. And then the third question is like, how do you show up in a way that's, again, dignifying and ethical? I think if the first two questions that, let's say you're an ally and you ask yourself a question about what you bring and you think there is an added value of what you bring to this issue. Like, for example, like in your photo, in your access, you have access, you could bring this issue into a platform that could never be brought to otherwise. Then the question is like, how do you do it in a way that's equitable, that's ethical, and that's dignifying? And I think the third question, this where it requires a lot of unlearning and learning that we all have to do. Intentions are not enough, because actually, funny enough, like this is the first thing the photographer in Syria told me. She's like, this is not my intention. I'm here because I care. Like, I entered Syria the moment the border was open. And I was like, I did not debate your intentions. And I'm sure you actually have good intentions. But you could just like do things differently. So I think asking ourselves these three questions and spending time on unlearning and learning the space we take up, how we take up the space, how we show up, the energy we put, and the culture of the communities that we're going to. This is the homework that we all have to do. To be I would say to be allies who are equitable, and to be allies who are really supporter and dignifying of the people.
I will, but I just wanted to firstly just to say thank you to Sana. It's lovely to see you again after 2017, I think. And Sana, I'm really very deeply moved that you gave time to this, particularly after your visit to Syria to look for your dad. We met in Italy, as Sana said, in 2017, and at the time we knew that your dad was missing. We were there for a conference on migration and media, and in response to your question and to Sana's response, I just wanted to add that one of the things that we came across was also the ways in which reporting happens, and how many photographers are employed to take photographs, and they're literally sort of dropped there and then returned within a day. So the long story is not one that media companies invest in, and and that costs money, and the long story is inevitably my previous photographic project was on Sebastião Salgado, whose photography evokes a lot of debates precisely around representation and the questions that Sana was talking about. But he talks about how his long projects were his personal projects paid for, that he did commercial projects or press work in order to be able to do his more engaged photography. So I think photography, people photograph for different reasons, but if you're doing it for a job and you have to turn around the instantaneous picture that's going to hit the headlines, then it's a very, very competitive and aggressive kind of context in which you are photographing. I just wanted to reply as well to Mirza, his question about Afghanistan. And of course, yes, it is true. It is a country that has gone through severe conflict, and many, many young Afghans around the world. I didn't go into the nationalities of the displaced. When I talk about the displaced people who are in the Mediterranean region, looking to make a life there or to move in from, various countries, many of them are from countries like Afghanistan that have suffered a lot of conflict, and where opportunities for youth is very, very limited. So certainly the realities that they go through, of course, each community and each individual will have their own story. But certainly, I did not focus specifically on Afghanistan, but nor was I excluding them. They're part of that scenario of mass displacement that is crossing the Mediterranean region.
Okay, right over there, and then one online. Yeah.
Between 10:30 this morning and 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Sorry, can you use mic just here? Yeah, just so they can hear online.
Sure. Yes, I teach English to foreign adults. This morning, between 10:30 in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was teaching a class of foreign students, largely from Afghanistan, but also from Waziristan, which is part of Pakistan. Now, these Afghanis, including some Afridis, if you know about them, had had a really bad time in their life. They were young people, extremely optimistic, extremely hardworking, extremely positive, and it was a privilege to teach them. So although these people had had a very bad time, and they described to me what's still going on, which is an atmosphere of violence and sort of mafia-type activity over there. Nevertheless, these guys had come to Britain, and they were determined to make a success of their lives here. So I just want to put on record that I was impressed by their application to their work, which is in this case learning English, and most importantly, by their optimism and lack of negativity, and all the best to them.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a question from Maitha online.
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
I want to first, my name is Maisa Khatib. I'm a professor at Arizona State University, and I'm delighted and honored to join this amazing book launching and the whole conversation that it's very important. I want to thank my friend, Ashram Khuzrafi, who posted this on Facebook, so I got to know about it and then sign up. So thank you for creating the conditions for others to learn about this important work. Congratulations, Professor Parvati Nair, on this book. I'm going to buy it today. I found it on Amazon, so I'm very excited to read it. My question is for Sana. Sana, I want to say thank you. I want to say shukran in Arabic for raising important issues about ethical measures when it comes to covering stories, reporting, and taking photography, or for photographers in the areas of conflict, stricken areas, and mainly refugee stories. My question for you, when you responded to the previous question, you talked about very important pieces as recommendations and suggestions on how to avoid these kind of unthoughtful, unethical behaviors of some journalists when it comes to photos. You talked about the individual level, the unlearning, the question my positionality, to ask about the dignity of people that I'm taking pictures of. But I want to ask you if you have thought about systemic changes, mainly structural reforms or policies that really can be launched somewhere, or create the conversation at academic level or organization levels, where we come up with some guidelines that really dictate policies when it comes to this, because we cannot rely on just the individual level of tackling this important issue. Thank you, Sana.
Okay, is then at the back of the room.
Should I? Or
if you just, there's another question.
Thank you for all of the speakers. I just had a quick question, I suppose, about the changing role of who it is that acts as the photographer, because I think we can see, across recent time how that's changed. You know, you look at the Vietnam War and the pictures that were released from that, how that famously led to mass movements in the US and, across the world in general. I know there's that famous photo of, children and families running after a, what's it called, a attack with Agent Orange, napalm, yeah. And, you know, you look at other times as well, specifically in Gaza, how the role of photographers has changed there, how there's a lot of journalists going in who, you know, now aren't just acting as regular journalists, they're also putting their own life on the line with how much they've been targeted by the Israeli state. But also, you know, the role of, you know, regular Palestinians, regular people in Gaza that are playing a huge role, posting pictures of everything they can find online so that the world will believe the genocide that is happening there. And at the same time, you know, there's a question of, is stuff like that even immune to censorship? I mean, you look at the way that, say, Elon Musk has bought Twitter and completely turned it into a right-wing hellscape. You look at the way that America recently banned TikTok, and now that's been reversed now, but it just goes to show the power that the top of society really have to blur out voices like that. So I suppose my question is, what do you see, you know, the role of social media, of greater connection playing in the role that photography plays in, you know, really helping to spread the message, to paint a picture of what displacement and immigration look like?
Okay, we could perhaps have one more question or contribution. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Parvati. That was so humbling to listen to you, and so beautifully presented the content of your book. My question is really from a art historian's, curator's perspective, really how you write about this sort of great range of images you have, which come from photojournalism to the Palestinian artist, I forgot his name, who uses very personal imagery, also maybe, you know, taken in the absence of the place where they belong to, for which there's a longing. So how you write about this, and also my question was, the curator, so if you were to show these images in a space other than a book, how would you do that, and what kind of considerations would you take into account?
Okay, I'm going to ask Sana. Oh, there's one more online. Okay, go on. Andre, you're coming up on our screen. Yep, we can see you, Andre.
Hello. It's a tough questions to answer so far for Miss Sana and Miss Nadi. I want to congratulate you a lot for the book. I haven't read it. I might order it. I'm a bit shy. I want to have two really quick questions. The easier one for Miss Sana Mustafa. What do you think about? Let's make it. What do you think about Al Julani? Quickly, yeah. Not in a few words. I don't want to change the topic too much. And regarding to Miss Parvati Nair, probably a big question, but also I don't want to change too much the subject, although it's on point. What are the solutions for the migrations? Because we know Labour doesn't have a strong case. They can't really do much. We have now the conservative leader Kemi Bardano, who suggested this a bit weird suggestion, and Reform UK is also not much better. And all the laws that come from House of Commons are scrutinized by House of Lords. So what the solutions would be? Thank you so much, and I appreciate a lot for being invited here. It's an amazing panel. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that. There's quite a few questions there. Shall I take Sana first? If you would like to come back, Sana, and then Parvati.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly to respond to myself. شكرا كتير على كلامك. Thanks for everyone questions. Yes, I have thought, and I actually have worked on changing the narrative and around communication and image on a systematic level. I actually always say, even on as I was saying, I was a CEO of an organization called Asylum Access. So I started with my own a global organization of how we kind of audit our image and communication and our language. And even with that project, actually on an organizational, global organizational level, we came back to the individual. So actually, no matter what we do, it's gonna kind of have to come back to the person, because at the end of the day, there's like the people like me who are making decisions and creating those systems. But outside of that, I absolutely, I think, outside of the individual, you have to make things, integrated into governance, whether it's in an organization, an institution, or at a government level, to really make things change. And we created guidelines, basically. I'm not going to go into the details here, but absolutely there has been a number of examples of guidelines about communication, and that includes image and language. And I think the two are very intertwined, obviously, and both have created a lot of associations about forced displacement, right? And I was just going to give a quick example. Even with the United Agency for Refugees, UNHCR, they have called refugees for the longest time up until last year as persons of concern. And this language is very dehumanizing. And if anyone of concern is the system, not the people themselves. And so that's an example of how we worked really hard and advocated to change that language. And they have changed it just last year after decades into people on the move. But that goes back again, kind of language and image really intertwined. And I would be happy to connect on guidelines of things we agreed on, for example, in my organization about images we use. And we mostly, for example, quick example, we decided to really move away from anything that has faces. You really don't need faces, by the way. You don't need people's faces. And I think we do. And then once you actually want to explore other options, you find out you can exactly achieve the same purpose and get people the same message without people's faces, especially if people's faces are not in the most dignifying place. And I think this is one of the things we did. The other thing was we actually did donor education with our own partners, because our donors and partners also want those images in the reports. And so we did one-on-one with each one of them, and we did a lot of education about why we should not do that, and why these reports could have illustrations, and how the illustrations could actually also be representative of the people instead of the faces themselves. And that maybe would go against what a lot of photographers would claim, is that the power of the human face. And I think maybe, but it's enough because 70 years of the power of the human face, and people still in the camps, without access to basic rights. And so that served certain way, but did not really serve the people themselves. It served the industry, it served academia, it served donors, but it did not serve the people themselves, really. And so that kind of was an invitation as well. And another practice we did in bringing others along with us about why we need to change the image and how we could change the image. And then we could talk more offline. And then on the question of Jolani, this is not the space for it. I don't have opinions of him much yet. I think the general sense in Syria that we want this government and this country to succeed, and we want to live in liberty. And so we are going to work all together to make this new project work. And we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anna.
Yeah, I come back on your question, if I may. I just wanted to say that in terms of the selection of images itself, it wasn't as if I was able to just select any image that I wanted. There were all sorts of constraints around what I could include and what I had to exclude. Firstly, there's a limit on the number of images that you can include in the book. But apart from that, perhaps the most important one was a financial one. And that relates back to what Sana was saying, who owns the image, whose image is it? And of course, images have also artwork value. And some photographers I found an incredible range of responses. There were some who said, well, yes, you can have the rights to reproduce, but it'll cost you £1,500. And that is, double of the sort of research allowance that one plays with. And so, and then there were others who were incredibly generous and said, well, just I want to support education. I want to support that, the work you're doing. And so they gave it for free, and they gave rights. So there was a huge variety there and range. I have myself no curatorial experience. So in a sense, I was working with the image, what it evoked when I looked at it, how I interpreted it, and the kind of political, historical context that it was gesturing to. I guess my own work and my background has been very much sort of somewhere between the humanities and the social sciences. And so I was looking at it more as a sort of a frame which is going to bring forth certain issues and certain dynamics, if you like, that are historical, political, and experienced in the real world. But I think your question is really interesting. I don't know. I mean, I hadn't thought of the book even as a curated piece, but of course it is. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah. Is there?
I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes if anyone else like to say anything. I might say something if that's all right. I'm just sort of trying to piece together some of the things that you've said, and about when we come to look at photographs. I look at them, I'm an activist and have been for a long time. So when I look at things, I'm trying to see how they help me understand the world more, but also do they inspire me or give me a direction to change the world and be an active part in changing the world. And I was at a workshop last weekend, an anti-racist workshop, about, someone mentioned reform, and the issue of migration came up there, obviously, and how the dominant narrative around it that you have been talking about, and how can we challenge that? How can we put a different narrative? And I actually feel that the movement, certainly in this country, and you look at Palestine, where I come from in Cambridge, there's been a number of photographic exhibitions which the like we've never seen, you know, and they've grown out of the movement, and they've grown out both here and across the world and in Palestine. And for me, that's really a very positive thing. And so I think photography at the moment plays a central role in shaping how we bring people into activity, but also in terms of, you know, the way forward. And the last thing I wanted to say was that you talked about what the image is, the impact it can have, and the image of the Palestinians going back, you know, into Gaza was one that really, over the past week, has, you know, reignited for me the need to be active, you know, because here is a people who are continually fighting for their land, and I'm going to ally myself with them.
Well, yeah, okay. Any other thoughts or yeah? Sorry, yeah.
That was amazing, the whole thing, the whole conversation. Just one question in terms of ethical side of taking photo. We always talk about how we're supposed to not objectify they suffer, they pain, and go through that. And since a few years ago, more and more photographers talk about that. But I wonder to know how we think about audience they write. So we try to show the whole pain, the whole history, which is important and impact our life, and not even that time happen. Even you know, as a person, you carry with yourself the whole pain. You carry, you hand it to next generation, and you try to talk about that. But how you can do that without showing the violence, but talking about the violence? And also at the same time, be worried about, if I talk about that, how my audience gonna be triggered, who is the audience, how I need to care about them. That's the thing. So I'm a photographer, and I'm working on the politics and also social things. And I always try to, as Sana said, always hide the face. There is no face. There is something behind. But at the same time, I'm thinking, so we don't need a face, yeah, but the image show the pain, and my audience goes through that, start looking at that, and they start telling me, oh my God, by looking at this, I'm start feeling the pain. So how we can find a line, taking care of audience, and also talk about this important issue. Thank you.
photography specialist. I'm looking at you, Liz. I think a lot of people who work on photography who might have thought about these issues. Don't know if someone else wants to say something about it.
I was thinking when you were talking that it's often about the space between images and what space that opens up for people to actually start thinking and draw on other memories, other aspects, other information, and so on and so on. It's sometimes not the literal image, but what the image invokes and the possibilities it starts to imply for moving forward in some way, I think. It's very boring just having somebody say, this is how it is. You think, okay, fine, I'll move on. You know, so opening up space for reflection is my response.
I don't know if anyone here, I'm sure you know the photographer Alfredo Jar, who is Chilean, and I think he's based in the US. There's an amazing picture from Rwanda called The Eyes of Emerite Guteta, and it's basically just the eyes of a woman. And I think that's a very, very powerful picture, because this is a woman who came out of church one Sunday and found her and her entire family was slaughtered in front of her eyes, and she was the sole survivor. And so when we stand there and look at her eyes, in a way, we are standing in this place where the murderers of her family were standing, where the event happened. And I think that's image is, obviously it needs a context, it needs a frame, you have to be able to read it. But it is when you know about the history and what the image is trying to gesture towards. And I think it's that gesture in the image, in a way, that's important, rather than what is, otherwise images would be very two-dimensional, as you say. Yeah. I think we have about 5-10 minutes for, should we, yeah, sorry. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to leave you now, but thank you so much all for having me, and thank you, Parvati, for inviting me, and really congratulations. And yeah, as I said in the message, please, if I can be of help to anyone, please don't hesitate to reach out, and wish you all best of luck.
Thank you, Sana. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. And I'll take this opportunity to thank everyone else as well. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Nava, and Liz, and everyone, and Federica also, and Sharam, who wasn't here. Thank you for being here, everybody, and online. Okay.
Okay. So we do have a little bit of time if you want to come up and chat, look at the book, buy the book, browse the shop, have a drink before you go. And I'll just let you know that our next event is also about a photographic book. This time it's called Blood, Sweat and Tears, because it's 40 years since a miners' strike in this country. And this book actually tells that story. So that is on the 14th of March here in the shop. Yeah. So do hang around, come on up and look around. And thank you very much for coming.